It's only the audience that it's potentially reaching is the only reason why there's any advantage of using it. Like, hey, there's Daniel. Hey, welcome. We had our other guest joined us for a second, and then he dropped off. So I'm not sure what happened there. So what we'll do is we'll get started since you're here, and maybe Jack will be back with us. I'm not quite sure what happened there. As soon as I invited him to speak, then he dropped off. So right, so we are at our second episode of Demo Days. We are going to record this, and I'll edit out the first 10 minutes while everybody was figuring out how to get here, and then I'll get this up on YouTube once I get it downloaded. So this is the second episode of Demo Days, and we are the Meta Guides, which is a sub DAO of Meta Cartel, and we kind of help people that get grants or help people get grants in the with Meta Cartel. So today we have some recent recipients of grants from Meta Cartel. We have Daniel from the RnDAO, as well as Jack was here, and they're working on a project called BattleZips, which is a sort of Web3 version of the game that everybody grew up playing, Battleships, and it's meant to educate people on ZK Rollups, which is pretty interesting topic right now and pretty hot topic, I think, in the crypto world. Everybody wants to be able to, I think, sometimes have a little bit more anonymity on the with what they do on in the Web3, and ZK Rollups is kind of that zero knowledge stuff that might allow that to happen in the future. And we also have Daniel here today from RnDAO, which is a research DAO, researches Web3 and kind of everything that's involved with that. Maybe if you want to jump on and let us know what you're up to, Daniel, and give yourself a little introduction and tell us about RnDAO.
Sure. Thank you very much. So RnDAO is a research and development DAO. We essentially started when we were seeing that there were a lot of different DAO tooling projects doing research in-house and not necessarily doing it with enough resources for the research to be really high quality. And as a result, there was a lot of DAO tooling built that was not really fit for purpose. And also we were seeing like a lot of things coming out of hackathons and so on that were not necessarily good ideas, and people were having fun and building connections and so on. But let's say the lack of product market fit can really kill some of these teams. So we wanted to do something about that, came together and started doing these DAO where we essentially incubate different initiatives. They start as research projects, and then as they evolve, some of them become products. We also operate as a research agency for other mature organizations. And one of those was the community health project, which is the one that recently received a grant from Meta Cartel.
Right, and I see that there's some results to that research now. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So the initiative started basically because we were seeing in Twitter a lot of people asking, how do I measure community in DAOs? And at the same time, there is kind of like the popular phrase of DAOs are a community with a bank account. So we're like, well, community is a pretty big deal for this new type of organizations to succeed and flourish. And yet the way we are going about community is still a little bit ad hoc. And so we actually believe that community managers, community leaders are are really fundamental to make Web3 succeed. And we wanted to empower them with the best insights and analysis that we could. So on one side, we could know, well, this community is doing these things well, that community is doing these other things well. What did they learn from each other, and sort of exchange insights. And also for different people to be like, well, how is this working? Because quite often you can hear a rumor and so on, but it's not until you have it as data that you can actually align everyone to make something happen about it, and make change happen, and really improve the DAO, improve the organization, improve the community, and over time improve the product and so on. And so we started digging deep into this rabbit hole that is how to measure community, or what community health is, and how can we tell the difference from, there is some communities that when a shock happens, they fall apart, and other communities, a shock happen and they become stronger together. And we're like, okay, is there any way we can try to predict this or understand it? And we can try to understand what are the factors that enable these to happen, that make a community, let's say, not only resilient, but even anti-fragile, so it can improve and learn, evolve, and so on. And where we got to after a few months working with some social scientists and network scientists was, let's say, a fairly complex understanding of what community health is, which is not only the absence of illness, because you can ask people, are you burnt out, and so on. And so you can consider these as illnesses, and they give you some good insights. But you actually want to go deeper and be, okay, what is really health, and what are the conditions and the factors that promote health, and not just the absence of illness, but that make an organization not just be okay, but actually thriving. And in that, the key understanding was that a community is built of different levels. So you have the ecosystem in which that the community inhabits, and if that ecosystem is unhealthy, and the ecosystem collapses, the community is going to suffer a lot. So you cannot really say that the community is healthy unless it is part of a healthy ecosystem. Then within the community, you have different cliques or subgroups, or you can have different teams. And if those teams are unhealthy, equally the community is going to be unhealthy. And within the teams and subgroups and between these, you have the relationships between people. And it's also really important for these relationships to be healthy. And finally, you have the individuals themselves. And if the individuals are not healthy, if they don't have a state of well-being, the community is going to be fragile. Because when people are in distress, when they're in a tough situation, they're a lot more prone to conflict. They're a lot more prone to burnout, to disengage, and so on. And so we started figuring out how can we collect data across these different layers, across these different nested systems, to really understand how, and be able to start to predict and give actionable insights to community managers and community leaders. And we're using two techniques at the moment that allows us to do that. One is pulse surveys, so that's micro surveys that are frequent, so that gets you a way better response rate than a traditional big survey, and also allows you to benchmark and say, okay, this is how we were doing a month ago, how are we doing now? And so you can improve, and people can see results out of those surveys, so they go, actually answering matters. And so over time, engagement increases. And then the other thing is a technique called organizational network analysis, or social network analysis, that is about mapping the relationships between people. And so it's not simply, let's say, number of messages, because number of messages tells you very little. The number of messages can go up a lot. And so you can see the activity spike when something very positive is happening, but you can also see it when something very negative is happening. Like when there is a conflict, lots of people pay attention, but then after that, engagement shuts down because people are actually not happy, not having a good experience. So we needed more than that to really understand the shape of the network, the shape of the connections. And then you can start to see, is this network, for example, too clustered? Like it just feels like a gigantic space where everyone is talking and it's super noisy and you don't know who's doing what. And it's just like one single community that's really massive. And that can be overwhelming and really hard to onboard into and so on. Or on the other side, is it very silo and is completely fragmented into different sub-communities that don't really talk with one another. And at that point, even if people are happy within those sub communities, they're probably not happy across sub communities, happy with each other. So you need to have some sort of balance between these. So you have some tight clusters where people are interacting with each other and collaborating, and then some loose connection in between the clusters. And that creates a way more effective communication structure and a way more effective social structure for people to feel still a sense of belonging, even if the community is bigger, still a sense of like proximity and being in close connections with some people while having good information flow and information and knowledge transfer across them. So we started devising a range of metrics and indicators and published that I think a couple of months ago as a full report. And now we are in the process of saying, okay, this framework is there. We have gotten really good feedback, but for people to implement it is kind of hard. So what if we can turn these into a tool and start running, thanks to the tool, start running the analysis with different communities so we can start to learn a little bit more. Now, not so much about how do you understand whether the community is healthy or not, but also what are the different practices or tools or systems or processes that you can use. And that's, let's say, the way different communities are set up. And we can start to compare across communities and share knowledge. And that way really create a sort of a research driven playbook of this is how you can create great communities, as opposed to the usual best practices where people tend to adopt practices from successful organizations, but an organization can be successful despite being very bad at doing some things in the community side, not thanks to it. So with a broader data set and better comparison and a little bit more rigor around it, we can really understand what are the things that are actually having a positive effect towards improving the community. And that's kind of like the roadmap we're going on now. Well, thanks to Meta Cartel and a few others who have supported us on that journey to continue learning more about community and rally community leaders and community managers to advance these in Web3 and help us have healthier, thriving communities.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce, would you prefer to be JP4G? I can go use your Web3 name, or how would you like me to address you? Oh wait, he's still a listener. Um, my apologies. Invite to speak. Yeah, no, you should have an invitate. You should have an invitation there that you could respond to if quite sure. So, something that I've just read about is you're going to have a research-a-thon. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how people can get involved with that while he's figuring out how to respond?
Yeah, of course. So with the research-a-thon, before I mentioned how we are seeing that a lot of hackathons leads to a lot of people prototyping things, but they can sometimes solve really well the wrong problem. So a lot of building things to address symptoms rather than to address root causes. And equally, a lot of these teams then don't continue. So for example, multiple layer ones who are sponsoring hackathons and they have a grant pipeline. A lot of people are joining the hackathons, but they're not applying for the subsequent grants, and that's partially because what they built was a sort of dead end. So to balance that out, we were thinking, well, before people join a hackathon, like before you go into solution mode, you need to understand the problem you're solving. And actually, the really talented builders, the really talented entrepreneurs, they tend to be very good researchers as well. But the majority of people don't know how to do good research, and especially in the context of DAOs and in the context of Web3, is not necessarily easy. So we're lucky to have in RnDAO from the beginning some very, very, very experienced researchers, like one of the people who started with us. She used to lead research at Google Suite, and before that at Asana, and so on. So she knows how to do this at, let's say, at a world-class level. And then we have been doing a lot of different tests and experiments and different ways to do it in Web3. And so what we thought is that we could run this cohort program where we help people who are interested in learning more about DAOs, interested in onboarding into this space, and as well entrepreneurs, social scientists, design researchers, and so on, and help these people come together, assemble into teams, figure out what are really meaningful questions to research, essentially problems that are worth being solved, and then go and dive deep to learn a lot about this problem so that then at the end of the researchathon, they can be ready to start prototyping and have way higher chances of building a successful venture that is going to have product market fit, that is going to essentially provide real value for the ecosystem, for the users, and as well create a sustainable team where people can benefit as well. And so we are loosely starting. I think that we're going to run the first workshop on the 10th of November on how to craft good research questions. If anyone is interested to join if you follow the RnDAO Twitter, we have tweeted there quite a bit. You can just see in our tweet feed. There is a couple of announcements about it, and you can just click through and register for the researchathon. We're also in the process of onboarding different partners and sponsors. I think Near is one that's starting, and we have a lot more to speak with who are interested in offering prizes for those who create the best submissions of research.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah. It's definitely something that I find that it's needed, right? Like every DAO that you're in, it takes a lot of work to do your own research all the time, and it's important that people do their own research, but just having opportunities to access professional research in this area is kind of hard. It's not really an academic topic and taught in universities, I don't believe yet. So a lot of times DAOs have been on their own to figure things out and don't have access to, the types of research that's really needed for people to move forward in the space, right? I kind of wish that Jack was able to figure out his mic, because it's really where I found this common thread between the guests, you guys today. BattleZips are kind of trying to teach us about ZK rollups, which is a super complicated thing to think about. I like anytime that I read about it, I just kind of get lost, right? It's like mathematical, and I don't think in terms of mathematics myself. Um, so I always have a difficult time understanding ZK rollups, and what BattleZips is aiming to do is kind to teach people about it and the uses for it, how it sort of works, and also kind of involved with educating the Web3 world in a more, in their case, in a practical hands-on case, in a sort of bringing gameplay into the learning environment, and the sense that crypto zombies previously did with Solidity and still do. I think that crypto zombies is perhaps a little out of date and could use some updating, but the for anybody that wants to learn Solidity from the first time, it's um, just one of those things that everybody kind of goes to as the product to use. And I think with ZK rollups, that's sort of the idea with BattleZips, is to be that tool, the introductory tool for people to learn about the possibilities with ZK rollups. And I'm not sure what's. Or you know what? Are you on your computer? Because if that's the case, you can't talk, and maybe that's why. Because you have to be on your mobile phone to speak on. Like, the only reason why Twitter Spaces is good is because of the audience that it has potential to reach. Other than that, like if if Elon Musk is listening to all the Spaces, please improve this app so that people can use their computers to use it. Um, anyways, with that being said, was kind of the hope of having him on to explain a little bit of that stuff, but unfortunately,
Yeah, I believe he's moving to the phone. Indeed, he had the situation. I've been there definitely to realizing way too late that Twitter Spaces doesn't work on the laptop. But I think he's changing now.
yeah, it's unfortunate. Like I'm sitting here looking at this beautiful podcast gear that I have, like a nice microphone and all that stuff, and it's just a nice little paperweight right now. It'd be, sure, it would be nice to use it. So, anyways, how would people access your research? How do you publish the research?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we publish quite a few things. If you go to rndao.mirror.xyz, that's our blog, and we have quite a few different topics there. We have talked some research about compensation on how to make DAOs more inclusive and also culturally more aligned with other cultures who are outside of the Anglo-Saxon world. As far as compensation system design goes, we have talked about decentralized leadership and of course community health. We have both the full paper there that's almost 40 pages on the topic of community, and for those who are pressing time, we have a short summary that's titled "How do we measure community in DAOs?" And as well, we did some research before with Sobol, thanks to a sponsorship and in a partnership with them. In that was kind of like our research agency functioning, where we are helping them to do this research to advance their product strategy, and they were very interested into looking into sub DAOs. So I think this was maybe 4 months ago or 5 months ago that we did that collaboration. And on the back of that, we also end up publishing a couple of articles about some of the top challenges in sub DAOs, and then as well understanding what are the reasons, like what motivates DAOs and different people, what are the rationales they have for creating sub DAOs and how do they go about it.
I definitely want to pull on that string a little bit, and I see that we finally have our other guest
Yes,
figured
hello.
out. Well, welcome. Hi, how's it going?
Good. I apologize for that, but
No,
I'll
that's
figure it out
okay.
now.
Yeah, Twitter Spaces is clunky, and it's not my preferred tool, but it is what it is for now. So yeah, welcome.
Yeah, I'll file
I,
with
I, I
with Elon.
yeah, I don't know if you heard my. I kind
Yeah,
of bumbled my way through. I hope I had it somewhat accurate, and if there's any corrections, please take the floor and tell us about your project.
of course. Yeah, I just want to say Daniel is really interesting, and probably want to follow up at some point in the future. But so yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. If you're a Solidity developer and you're looking in from the outside on this crazy party that's going on with ZK, you really have no clue what's going on, especially on the mathematical side. Um, and That's actually kind of a product of two things. Obviously, there's the math that you are going to struggle to understand if you're not a math person like we are at BattleZips. We're not. We're programmers. We're picking up math as we're having to, but approaching it from basically zero beyond high school and basic, college math, maybe. So the idea is that we want to establish kind of like a beachhead for the math stuff, and then the second part of that is a lot easier to fix. It's that you just don't know what order to consume the resources in. You don't know where the resources are. The entirety of zero knowledge is just scattered across the internet instead of being presented in like a single organized format for you. Like you said, like crypto zombies. It kind of force feeds you how to build a token. And there's very few things you need. Obviously, to be an expert, there's a lot of research you need to do, but to cross over from beginner to maybe starting to be intermediate, there's exactly one resource you need, and that's crypto zombies. And intermediates being generous, but like the ability to play ERC 721 that someone purchased for speculative reasons only, at the very least, is there from a single resource, which I think makes the prospect of zero knowledge, which is a lot less speculative, even that more promising, that much more promising. So with all that, we kind of started with kind of like the easiest thing to think through. We thought, at least for ourselves, when it comes to the application of zero knowledge, which ended up being a battleship game. And you'll see a lot of like BattleZips is by no means, at least the first version, by no means a unique product. You'll see a lot of ZK battleship games across different zero knowledge, domain specific languages, and ZK or ZK VMs. And that's fantastic. Again, it's a really basic way to wrap your head around having two adversarial parties coordinate private information with each other. And the goal is we built out the BattleZips V1 repository, and the goal is kind of to, and it's all open source, so you take it, figure out how it works in this one specific application, and then try to work backwards on perhaps more real world examples. Because obviously a video game is not the most exciting application of zero knowledge. There's very, very many, if not approaching infinite, but there's many ways that this can be applied in the real world. So we're just trying to give people a way to very quickly mentally model or I guess reconcile with how their mental model of what they expect to happen, the end functionality, and how that occurs in the form of this BattleZips repository, all the code that works together to accomplish that, by going through and documenting that really well in a way that basically just, again, this is a very novel industry, so there's really hasn't been that much even in the way of documentation. We think it'll really accelerate how quickly people can pick up zero knowledge. So, if you're listening to this in retrospect and you are interested in zero knowledge, but and it helps a lot to be a Solidity developer. I can't speak to jumping in absolutely dry on the coding, but if you are a Solidity developer, by far the biggest barrier is not actually the math. It is just the obscurity of the resources. So that's kind of what the BattleZips Discord is for. And I don't want to like shill per se, but it's not like we're selling anything.
No, that's what you're here. That's what you're here for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's no monetary product to it. It's a developer community, so and it helps us to have to field these questions and figure out the actual answers. So, if you're looking for your start in zero knowledge, or specifically with the CIRCOM language, that's kind of what we're focused on. But again, just anything zero knowledge, if you went in there and started throwing us questions, trying to figure out how to get yourself started, we would definitely help you out. And on the more specific stuff, debugging, again, that's bread and butter. So, there are communities out there, not just our own as well. We have a pretty big, actually, Git book that we're working on. And one of the sections, and that's basically like the actual answer to crypto zombies, our first version, because it's not interactive. But it details everything that we think you would need to start asynchronously. And as well, there are a bunch of communities you can join for kind of more synchronous communication to do that. But again, the biggest thing holding you back is really at this point, just your ability to self-teach any sort of programming. So again, I just really want to encourage people who are kind of on the fence about it to jump in, because it is it's definitely a good time. There's a lot of fervor and excitement and even investment around that, but also the actual technology is moving in this direction. So you do get to be kind of on one of the bleeding edges, one of the many bleeding edges of blockchain.
Yeah, for sure. And it's zero knowledge is going to, for DAOs, I think, to really take off, it's going to have to go there because people are going to want anonymous voting, and I think that
Right.
that this is going to be the solution to that. Um, it's almost necessary because I think that a lot of people don't participate in governance because they don't necessarily want to be against the current trend, right? Like they might not want to vote yes sometimes, but because it's public, their vote. I think that sometimes people just choose to not even partake, and I think that's ZK Rollups is going to be an important move when it's available for DAOs.
Yeah, I very much agree.
So yeah, so kudos to that. So first thing people have to do is play Crypto Zombies and that before they play BattleZips. Essentially what you said.
Most likely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're focused on EVM based ZK. If you really wanted to jump into ZK without having to be an EVM developer, this is probably the one case I would actually plug Starkware. There's probably no other case aside from the pure technology, because I don't love the vendor lock-in risk. But they have like insanely good technology, which is it's tragedy. But if you aren't already locked into the EVM like most of us are, you could just go straight into the start, or like Mina or something, or maybe a Leo, just any of the ZK virtual machines. You could probably skip actually having to develop with Solidity. But if you want to be doing slinging zero knowledge on the root chain, or even like Polygon or Gnosis or something like that, then you're going to need to go down this route.
Yeah, I think that Polygon is probably going to be one of the first out of the gates on doing it on EVM. They're putting a lot of work into it. They've brought a lot of the developers, and I don't think there's a whole lot of developers that really do it, right? So for them to have hired a few of them, they're hiring vast majority of the people working on it. So I've got my eye on Polygon.
Yeah, they actually, so Polygon Hermes, I know they've got a couple of zero knowledge projects. Polygon Hermes is, and it's more than just Jordi Bellina, but Jordi Bellina, the man, the myth, the legend, is also, his team is responsible for Circom itself. So like Hermes runs on Circom, we're using Circom in our stack. So how I think like ZK EVMs work out is essentially you end up, because the EVM itself is entirely publicly traceable. There's no zero knowledge to it. So with the ZK EVM running is just basically the same as an EVM, assuming it's like type 1 or close enough that it can run everything you need. Type 2, I guess. You're running Circom privacy circuits on top of Circom scalability circuits, all written basically by the same group of people. But obviously, they've brought more and more people on, but from the same kind of ecosystem. So,
yeah. Daniel, I'd like to go back and pull on that thread about sub-DAOs a little bit now. The Meta Guides itself is a sub-DAO of Meta Cartel. Originally, the Meta Guides came into existence as guides to help people through the grant process to get grants, and I think maybe the model's changing a little bit, and the Meta Guides, we're kind of looking for a new job. And one thing that's always come up in a lot of grant applications is the desire to simply get access to the network of Meta Cartel. Sometimes people don't even ask for funds when they make proposals. They just would like to have access to maybe test an app or something like that. So the meta guides itself kind of is going in that direction of trying to be the after the grant sort of connections to the Meta Cartel network, I suppose. And by doing that, like, I kind of wonder, do you see that as a sign of good community health, Daniel, that a sub-DAO forms and just kind of naturally occurs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the main reasons we are seeing for sub-DAOs to emerge is because there is a need to execute on a specific piece of work, and the DAO is a little bit too much of a diffuse and broad structure, and not necessarily geared to address really quickly, or let's say to experiment very quickly with an idea. And the sort of configuration that we know works really well for these is usually a small dedicated team who's going to go and do the research into what people need, who's going to start trying out different ideas and hopefully find something that works. So the fact that these groups are naturally emerging is very, very positive, because it shows, one, engagement, motivation. People care about the network. They're looking for opportunities, and they're trying to find ways to address those needs, which is essentially what you need, is for the organization to have this sort of emergent structure where problems are identified and addressed very organically by the community. So is super, super positive. Where it can get a little bit tricky sometimes is that a lot of these teams that start, they initially start to address an internal need. And quickly after, especially in a space that is as entrepreneurial and as DAOs, and because Web3 has had so much hype, it has attracted tremendous amount of talent. And with that has come a lot of people who have a lot of different skills, and they end up sometimes doing relatively menial jobs or small things. And these are ambitious people who like creating and inventing and innovating and so on. And so when a lot of times these sub-DAOs start kind of that way, with contributors who are like, oh, I just want to find a way to be a contributor in Web3. And maybe the first few months, they're very satisfied that they find it and they make the transition to Web3, or at least partially, or something like that. And then after a bit, they each continues and they start to see new possibilities. So it happened, for example, at Aragon with a customer support team that was there, and they started providing customer support for Aragon. And then they realized that a lot of the people asking for customer support, they were actually asking, how do I integrate these other things with the Aragon stack? And so at that point, the customer support team was like, oh, this is cool. This is an opportunity. What if we provide customer support to these other tools as well? And so instead of becoming, let's say, an internal team, they become more of a somewhat autonomous team, or like a small startup or a small venture, if you like, that is servicing multiple DAOs, and they become more autonomous that way. And in theory, we're talking about empowering people and so on. So at the beginning, it's great. But then the folks at Aragon, they start to freak out and be like, oh, but what happens if they're no longer giving enough customer support for us? And how do we treat that? And so because they were not really prepared for that, like they were saying that they wanted to empower this team and that people should be autonomous and so on, but then in practice, they haven't really thought through the consequences and the fears that can come with that. So then they end up trying to stop them from doing that and putting pressure for them not to do it. And then the people feel resented and are unhappy, and it creates all sorts of problems. And we have also seen that in some other situations, for example, in Bankless in different ways, where it was more like there is the brand that the sub-DAO is using the brand of Bankless and leveraging that, but it's not super clear then what does the main DAO get back from the sub-DAO and what are those relationships. So it's really, really important to kind of understand the relationship and what is the scope and how do you evolve the scope, especially. So let's say you guys are right now starting to facilitate this network access, and that's fantastic. Let's say you want to change what's the purpose or the vision for the unit. How do you make that decision in agreement with the main DAO, or how do you renegotiate those agreements? And that's a governance question that needs to be addressed. And as long as you can do that, then you have the setup that kind of takes you to the next level as a DAO. But otherwise, like for the early stages, let's say these sub DAOs emerging, it's really amazing.
Yeah, and to bring it back into the ZK rollups, I'm kind of wondering what you would think about that if DAOs became a little bit more anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's I'm not getting on here and advocating for subversion of enforcement by any means, but you know, you look at the CFTC and BZX, I think it's CFTC, and every single person who you know, ever, you know, bought this token, and yeah, they didn't know beforehand, and I think that might change afterwards, but even still, every single person who ever interacted with this token, even if they're not a holder now, is like on the radar and part of this court case. So I think that there's an intense demand for some sort of, you know, cover from that heat. And then I think the thing about ZK as well is that you can still have compliance woven in if you really wanted to build something that doesn't attract the CFTC. So you can solve that immediate problem of anyone and everyone being able to get up in your business very quickly, but you could also create certain summarizations or metrics that allow you to meet the bare minimum of compliance without totally leaking all this PII. So I think it's an inevitability out of the and there are some DAOs like you see, obviously Meta Cartels and I guess as well regular are good examples of DAOs that have a little more staying power because they're not just treasuries for tokens. But as they get more into the realm of actual service and products the way that companies do, it will be a requirement for them to kind of equip this tooling to be the most competitive versions.
How does there's a lot of talk in DAOs about reputation. It's a big thing. People trying to build reputation. Gitcoin does a lot with their passport to try to like amalgamate reputation in one spot. So it's you know, I think there's a fine line between or like building an anonymous reputation is kind of an interesting topic. And how do you see that playing out in the ZK world?
So we're actually taking a stab at that with BattleZips V2. Not directly, it's kind of a consequence of, so we're working on ZK state channels, right? And that is, you take a battleship game, play the entire game off chain, and then summarize the game as a proof of a battleship game where Alice won and Bob lost. And then to like do reputation, our idea was that it's a very simple idea. We just toss an ELO score on chain when you roll up that basically you collapse the state channel on chain. The same as like a chess game, basically. And what that is a qualitative or quantitative, I guess. You have a score that evaluates your quality without actually revealing those qualities. And I think in the context of DAOs, that can end up looking like maybe you've got like a set membership proof that's got all the DAO members, and you've got a project that goes on, and you don't reveal who the members are that say this person did well and they did their job, or this person did not do their job and I did not like working with them. You can create, and obviously you can, you know, kind of deduce it socially, but from a actual factual level, you can't prove it. But to go back, you can have like certain both social and maybe performative metrics that are recorded in some sort of DAO engagement summarized for that engagement, and then you have basically a scored performance on how someone engaged with the DAO in this specific project that can be added to some sort of resume for the DAO, without revealing all of the intimate things that they did negatively, because perhaps you don't want to completely blow their chance, unless it's like really egregious. You might want to think through ways to figure that out. But you provide them some privacy while also still allowing people to know that they weren't the easiest to work with, and vice versa. You know, it can act as a testament to your continued competence and easiness to work with. And that's just one example of how, you know, you could turn this around. We also think about it in terms of like DeFi credit scoring. So, but on the topic of DAO identity.
Yeah, neat. Daniel, I wanted to ask you about, it's kind of, I don't know if it's the mission statement for RnDAO, but the term humane collaboration is kind of an interesting term, and I was wondering if you could kind of take us down that rabbit hole a little bit as we wrap up here. Yeah, I just kind of was wondering why you use that term, empower humane collaboration.
Sure, thanks. I mean, it's something we are actively debating, or we have had many debates about. So I'm going to give you just kind of like a quick perspective of where it's coming from and a little bit what's my opinion, without necessarily speaking on behalf of everyone at RnDAO. But it started like, let's say we see DAOs as generally as a great thing. It has a bunch of downsides as well, but the reason for it, or part of the big reason why DAOs have become so popular, is, other than the technology being very exciting, is that corporations suck, and traditional work in corporations kind of suck. And we see these in the employee disengagement metrics that have been for many years above 80%, and like 80% of people are meh or actively working against the company they are working for. And so we have a disaster there. And then at the broader scale, we have the other disaster of global coordination. And so we see the whole idea of DAOs, and depending on how we define DAOs, you can be more radical or less radical. You can be like, oh, they need to be completely decentralized, and there can be not a single person that is identifiable. Some other people are like, oh, it's okay if there is a little bit more of a leader or something. It's technologically decentralized anyway. There is a bunch of different versions. And for us, where it came down to is whether we call it DAOs or not, whether they are using blockchain technology or not. At the end, what really matters is that they allow people to work together to solve the different challenges that we have, that they allow communities to self-organize and address their problems, both at the local scale and at the macro scale. And that we can do that by improving upon the relationships of exploitation that we have had. If we kind of draw a continuum between, like, on one extreme, sort of slavery, there's like extreme exploitation. And on the other side, there is very joyful collaboration where everyone is super excited and happy and receives a lot of benefits from this collaboration and feels very nourished by it. So moving towards that side, we can have at least consensual collaboration where everyone is sort of agreeing to the terms of what is happening. And so we've been trying to shift away from a perspective, let's say, where some people tell others what to do, because those are the power relationships where the majority can dictate over the minority. Even though that's democracy, you can still have a lot of non-consensual relationships there. The majority can still exploit the minority, and in some situations, the minority can sort of abuse their focus on a specific topic to advance their position at the expense of the majority. So we are trying to kind of change a little bit that logic and create a culture of agreement and a culture of deliberation and so on. And so as we started reflecting about that and what can be our vision for DAOs, that phrase sort of crystallized that the humane aspect of it has to be related to the well-being, to the purposeful collaboration to the, like we are opting into these and we're not being forced to do it. And that's, yeah, at least a good part of where it's coming from.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to start to wrap this up here. Is there any way that you need any help with BattleZips right now? Is there any, how can people go about collaborating to the project if you need anybody to help collaborate with? Do you have any needs right now?
So there's, I guess, on the needs level, the best thing that you could do to like accelerate us, and you being like whoever's listening to this, would be to check out the CIRCOM Git book that we're working on, and if you have the ability to correct it for content, that's fantastic. But otherwise, just making sure if you're an English speaker, and we're still working on it as well, so it's not completely done. But if you're an English speaker, we're going to be doing plenty of. We've already solicited some proofreading sweeps on it, but you know, the more eyes, the better. We're eventually going to translate it into beginning with Spanish and Chinese, but onto however many. I think we're going to probably stop at 10, unless people just really want to continue to do it. We want to make sure that the integrity of the content is there before we actually start putting it into other languages. So that's really the only thing. And if you really were interested in ZK state channels, you could of course reach out to the Ethereum Foundation's privacy and scalability explorations team to look into their kind of starting up a ZK state channel thing as well. So there's research and development to be done there that would totally end up in our collaboration. Beyond that, I would just say not necessarily to us, but the entire ecosystem needs more zero knowledge for privacy. The scalability is kind of being worked on by a lot of people. There's still a lot of money in it, so you know, you can still definitely go down that route, but it's a lot harder. The privacy can be picked up in a couple of months, and it's incredibly important for bringing blockchain, the EVM, into maturity. So I would say, you know, kind of for the health of the ecosystem and for your own competency, even if not through our own resources, definitely pursue how to use zero knowledge.
Wonderful, thank you. And the same question, Daniel, if anybody wanted to get involved with RnDAO, or if there's any specific needs that RnDAO has right now, please let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one quick thing for the next phase of the community health project, if you have a Web3 Discord-based community, we'll love to deploy the bot, give you some analytics, and that also allows us to advance these research and then provide it open source for the rest of the ecosystem. And the other thing is the researchathon, where if you're interested in either researching DAOs or DAO operations, DAO governance challenges, maybe starting a venture to address some of those things, check us out, and we can hopefully mentor you and support you through that process, and that helps us advance our mission. So anyone interested is very, very welcome. You can, for either of those, you can just check our RnDAO Twitter account and send us a DM, and we'll get back to you and orient you through that. Or otherwise, the announcements are in the Twitter feed, but feel free to just send us a message if you're lost, and we'll love to have a chat with you.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming on today, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to edit out the first 10 minutes while we were fumbling around with Twitter Spaces, and I will eventually get this up on YouTube for everybody to share around, and I'll as well the link for the Spaces. If people followed it later on, if you wanted to share it, people should be able to listen to it later on if they want. So that's that. In a couple of weeks, we'll have another one of these spaces, we're going to have another grant recipient from Meta Cartel Me tokens coming on, and probably trying to get another guest too. I like the idea of bringing two at a time and seeing what sort of synergies could occur naturally during these conversations. So we will be working on another guest, but Me tokens is so far confirmed for 2 weeks time from now, which is sometime in November 11th. Thanks again, guys. If you have any last parting words you want to share?
Yeah, Me tokens is great. Love their team. And Carter is one of the really important people who made the Diamond DIP possible. Well, he did a significant amount of that. So we definitely recommend you check that one out if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, so I'll appreciate that for you guys coming on again, and I'll get the links to you once they're all set. And with that, everybody have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. You too. Have a great weekend, and thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.